It is NFL roster cut down day, and we are exploring a 53-man roster projection for the Miami Dolphins based on the players currently under contract with the team.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami. Welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It's your team every day here on the Locked On Network. Today is Tuesday, August 29th, 2023. And that's a very important date on the NFL calendar because it's NFL roster cutdown time. And we're going to talk about the 53-man roster projection here on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. You can find our shows on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by the Gametime app. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Last-minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. So we've already had our first bump in the road, and it's important to note that the 53-man roster projection that we're going to put together is really based off of the players currently under contract with the team. This team's going to make some moves today. This team may make some waiver claims off of players that get cut by 4 o'clock. This team might trade for Jonathan Taylor. This team might trade players away. Case in point, courtesy of Jason Sarney of USA Today's Dolphins Wire. He was first on the news last night that Dan Feeney was getting traded to the Chicago Bears. That's a done deal. That's happened. ESPN's confirmed it. The Chicago Tribune's confirmed it. The Miami Herald's reported it. Dan Feeney's been traded from the Miami Dolphins to the Chicago Bears for a 2024 sixth-round draft selection. Dan Feeney would have been on my 53-man roster because he could play guard and he could play tag, or he can play center. So right now you have kind of this question mark at the backup center position. Is it Liam Eichenberg who can snap? Is it Ualave, the undrafted free agent from San Diego State? I think they've clearly shown they have an appetite for him as a player. But is he going to make the 53-man roster? I don't know. I do not know. What I do know is that the Dan Feeney trade probably is going to be the tip of the iceberg where Miami ends up moving and shaking and jostling, and they're going to shake up 5 or 6 spots on this roster, I bet, when it's all said and done. To get a 6th-round draft selection from Chicago, that's negligible returns for a trade. But at the same time, this was a player who you signed in March, who's been a career journeyman, who signed a 1-year contract, and you turned that into a draft pick. If you knew he was a fringe contributor on your football team, that's a job well done. To get something for a player who might otherwise get cut, you save about $1.2 million in the process, and you move on. I think the competition of the offensive line has been healthy. I do feel like you have a very firm top 3 in the offensive tackle room with Teron Armstead, Austin Jackson, and Kendall Lamb. Maybe not necessarily from a confidence of their performance and availability, but like those guys have separated themselves from the pack. For the interior group, your 3 starters have separated themselves as well. Isaiah Wynn, Connor Williams, Robert Hunt. Robert Jones, when healthy, he's got a sprained MCL. Sounds like it might be a month and a half. What does that mean for Robert Jones? Does that mean that he goes on IR? Does that mean that he's immediately available? I don't know. I would assume that this kind of move bodes well for Robert Jones and his availability, but I also don't know for sure. But the fact that you have this level of competition, and again, our entire discussion around the offensive line has been anybody that you bring in, you're going to have a hard time finding a player that's readily available because of scarcity at the position that would be better than your offensive lineman 7. Well, I think that was probably Dan Feeney, and they've now moved on. So they either feel the gap is very close between Dan Feeney and whoever was O-lineman 8, or they have other moves that are coming down the pipe. And that's kind of the nature of this period of time where there's going to be over 1,000 players that are out. And if you want the jump on getting somebody who you feel like could contribute to your football team, like the Chicago Bears very clearly felt like Dan Feeney could contribute to theirs in the midst of a slew of offensive line injuries, well, you go ahead and you trade a future 6th-round pick. What will be interesting is if there's another player that goes out in a separate move for another draft selection. What does that mean? Now you're hoarding draft picks. Are you hoarding draft picks to hoard draft picks? Or are you hoarding draft picks as a team in a win now window to have more ammunition to accomplish something bigger on your mind? That's the first place that my mind goes. Inevitably, that's the nature of the rumor mill that the Dolphins have been a part of for the past couple of weeks as it pertains to one running back from Indianapolis. I'll do my best not to say his name on the show. But the Dan Feeney thing was kind of the first thing that beat me to the punch because he would have been on my 53 roster projection 2 days ago. So too would Malik Reed. Malik Reed, it was announced yesterday that the team was parting ways with Malik Reed. They signed him to another 1-year contract, veteran player that came in with prior experience to Vic Fangio. I don't think he had a great preseason. I thought he left some plays on the field in the preseason games. He didn't really stand out to me in practice all that much when I was down at the first week of practice for training camp. And I think what you're looking for now is it was announced that the team was waiving Malik Reed or moving on from Malik Reed. And yet when the team released their first wave of roster transactions yesterday at 4:00, Malik Reed was not on the list. So is there a chance the team comes knocking for a late round draft selection for Malik Reed as we want to beat somebody to the punch and not have to subject him to the open market or to waivers? I can't say for certain, but I do think it is highly interesting that a player was announced to be informed that he was being waived, and it's the 4:00 announcement window closes, and he was not announced to have been waived. So I'm kind of keeping my eyes on that one, as well as, I don't know, what is Eric Saubert a candidate to move at the tight end position? I don't know. Is there a safety in this safety room that could get moved? I don't know. But Miami is off and running. Now, what I have done is I've put together a 53-man roster projection that is my best guess off of the information that we have and the players that are currently under contract. And we're going to get into that next here on this episode of Locked On Dolphins. If you love going to sporting events, but you find yourself stressing yourself out over the prospect of logistics, I've got good news for you. Gametime is here to help. Gametime is the place for last-minute ticket deals so that you can buy tickets without the stress. Gametime is a fast and easy way to buy tickets for all of the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. And with killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun that you're about to have. It's the fastest growing ticket app in the country for a reason. You can get images of your seats before you buy so you know exactly what to expect from a sightline's perspective. You can buy tickets in a matter of seconds, 2 taps, and you are set. And tickets are sent directly to your phone, so you never have to dig through your emails. Snag the tickets without the stress at Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last-minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to put the roster projection up on the screen that I have for the Dolphins. And this includes a couple of players that are going to post 53-man injured reserve. So there's going to be more than 53 names that you see here. But I've tried to indicate who those players are with a visual aid. So if you're watching on YouTube, great. But this is really just going to be, and I'm aware that this show, it's going to change. And the shelf life is going to be pretty sudden. So I would expect an update post 4 p.m. after the deadline passes and all of the cuts are announced. And we have an idea of what the first step of this next 53 is going to look like. And then when the team makes moves tomorrow, after finalizing a 53 and they get more players back on the roster and the practice squad is finalized, then we'll jump at it again. This stuff's going to happen fast today. Okay. But I'm going to do my best. And for those of you who are watching on YouTube, I'm going to go ahead and put the roster projection that I do have up on the screen for us to talk our way through. So, offensively, the group and the collection that I have 3 quarterbacks. And you can debate what order they go behind Tua Tagovailoa. That's fine. Really, it comes down to Tua Tagovailoa, Mike White, Skylar Thompson. Until Tua Tagovailoa is able to fully and completely alleviate the durability concerns that exist for him as a football player, I'm going to carry 3 quarterbacks. Quarterbacks that have been in the entire offseason program, quarterbacks that are well-versed in throwing to these receivers. I don't want to have to reset from a chemistry perspective. So Tua Tagovailoa, Mike White, Skylar Thompson for a grand total of 3 quarterbacks. The running backs in the backfield, I'm going to include a fullback, and I got 5 total here. Again, based off of the talent that is currently available on the Dolphins' 53-man roster. Raheem Mostert, Jeff Wilson, Devon Achane, Savon Ahmed, Alec Ingold. Now, the interesting thing about this group is if you are watching on YouTube, you see I have Alec Ingold and Tua Tagovailoa graded as quality starters. I have Raheem Mostert graded as an adequate level starter. Then I've got a number of players that I think are quality depth options at their respective positions in Mike White, Jeff Wilson, Savon Ahmed. You've got a rookie in Devon Achane, and you have a player who's an incomplete evaluation. We still need to know more. He needs a bigger sample size before we can say definitively what he is in Skylar Thompson. It's respectably deep group. Obviously, there's no roster cornerstone caliber players here. And those are going to rear their head here with just about every other position room. The only other position room that does not have a cornerstone, if you're painting with broad brushes, is the linebacker room on the entire roster, which will be really interesting if the Dolphins ultimately end up adding a cornerstone player. You could be saying, well, then the linebacker room is the only. You have your backfield group, you have your outside skill players, you have your offensive line, you have your defensive line, you have your linebackers, and you have your secondary. You're going to have a lot of cornerstones pollinated across this group. We'll see if they add one more down the home stretch here. Speaking of wide receivers, the outside perimeter weapons, I have 6. But there's a caveat. One of the 6 is a player that is going to be added after the 4 p.m. Eastern Standard deadline for cut downs, in my mind. So the 5 that I have making the initial 53 are Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Cedric Wilson, Eric Ezukanma, and Braxton Berrios. Wilson's another player I would not be surprised if they full court press and try and trade. I don't know that it's going to happen, but I would not be surprised if they try. So that's a storyline to watch. I have River Craycraft as the 6th wide receiver, and I have him coming back onto the 53 after the Dolphins clear a handful of 53-man roster spots in order to make room for, or in order to put Jalen Ramsey on injured reserve after a 53-man cut down as a hypothetical. The tight end room, this one I struggled with a little bit. I think you could cut a number of different ways, but I have Durham Smythe, Tyler Croft, Tanner Connor, and Julian Hill making the 53. Durham Smythe, Tyler Croft, those are 2 quality depth caliber pieces. They're both kind of inline blocker types. You have Julian Hill as another big physical inline blocker type that's really done, I think, enough to flash. And then I have Tanner Connor taking the spot that I would have guessed was going to Elijah Higgins because Connor is a year into the system. Higgins is brand new with his transition from wide receiver to tight end. And Connor did that transition last year and got a lot of run in the last preseason game. So I think you probably aspire to bring Elijah Higgins back on the practice squad, develop him for a year, and go from there. The offensive line, I have 9 total names. I do have Robert Jones as a conservative projection based off the timeline for his MCL sprain going on injured reserve. So the initial group is tackles, Teron Armstead, Austin Jackson, Kendall Lamb. Interior players, Isaiah Wynn, Connor Williams, Robert Hunt, Liam Eichenberg, and Robert Jones, but then Robert Jones going on to injured reserve after the 53-man cutdown window, and then Lester Cotton now coming back. And again, they've kind of sent signals that they like him. The question here is the backup center, obviously, with the Dan Feeney move. Either there's a corresponding move coming, there's a corresponding claim coming, or this could be Ulave. And if that's the case, you can cut this one of two ways. This can be a practice squad player that you would elevate, or you could just keep him on the 53. I'd be surprised if they kept him on the 53. I'd be completely honest with you. But I'm also surprised that they chose to part ways with Dan Feeney. I'll hit the specialists while we're here since they're tucked on that side of the ball in the visual aid. Kicker Jason Sanders, punter Jake Bailey, Blake Ferguson. So that is 29 players between the offensive group and the three specialists, designated specialists. So the question now becomes, okay, Kyle, what's going to happen on the defensive side of the ball? Obviously, there's a little bit more in the way of fine print with Jalen Ramsey, Nick Needham, Elijah Campbell now in question. We're going to tackle that as we bring this episode of Locked On Dolphins and a 53-man roster projection to a close. So I'll go ahead and pull the 53 roster projection back up for those of you keeping score at home on YouTube. The defensive tackles, I think it's probably easiest to start that way. Christian Wilkins, Zach Sealer, Raekwon Davis, Deshaun Hand. That's the group. They're the only 53 caliber players on the roster in the interior defensive line right now. I know there's questions. Christian Wilkins, do you trade Christian? You absolutely do not trade Christian Wilkins. You have Christian Wilkins under contract for $10.7 million. And I understand, it was Marcel Louis-Jacques from ESPN went on Big O show and alluded to Christian Wilkins got what the Dolphins feel is their best and final offer, and he hasn't signed it for whatever reason. And it's in the 22, the names that were invoked were players getting $21.5, $22, $22.5 million per season. And that deal's not signed. He can't skip games, and you don't trade him now. You're trying to win. He's under contract. You have the franchise tag at your disposal next year if you need it. You can franchise tag him, and you can work it out, or you can franchise tag him and you can trade him. But if you're going to trade Christian Wilkins, that's not happening now. There's no way. Not unless you get the moon and back and you get a player that could take his spot that's not that big of a drop-off, and there's not too many teams I envision that would be willing to offer you that. So he's on the 53, and I'm not thinking twice about it. On the edge, I have 5 players. Again, it's worth acknowledging that Malik Reed would have been on this for me, but you have Bradley Chubb and Jalen Phillips, your starters. Emmanuel Agba, again, another player that has long been associated as a potential trade partner. We shall see, or a trade candidate because of his roster or his salary. We shall see. Andrew Van Ginkel, and then Cameron Good. I think special teams potential here is what really pushes him as a second-year player who was a draft selection for the team. Your linebackers, I have 4. David Long, Jerome Baker, Duke Riley, Channing Tindall. All very fast, rangy, explosive players on the second level. You kind of get the sense that they might have liked a thump player, but with Mike Rose and Alexander Johnson, but neither one of those has materialized. Channing Tindall, I think, can be a thump player. We'll see what his continued second-year development looks like, but I think that's a pretty cut and dry group of 4. So you have 4 interior defensive linemen, 5 players that are on the edge, and then you have 4 players at the stack linebacker, which leaves you 11 players for the back 7, or for the secondary, excuse me. Your outside corners, let's just do all corners. Nick Needham's going to go directly onto PUP. He started the training camp on PUP. You can transition him to PUP to start the regular season with the switch, and he's not able to practice with the team for the next 6 weeks, the first 4 weeks of the regular season. At a minimum, he will be out. I think that's as no-brainer of a decision that the Dolphins have based on Nick Needham and his health and availability. You have Jalen Ramsey, Xavier Howard, Eli Apple, Cam Smith, Noah Igbenogany, and then Kader Kohu, making the original 53. Jalen Ramsey goes on IR after the 53-man cutdown. Nick Needham goes straight to PUP, so you don't need to manufacture an extra spot for him after the 4 p.m. deadline. And I think that's where you get your two special teams type players back in Keon Crossan, who you can probably get back on a lighter deal. And then you can also get Justin Bethel back. These are guys that are predominantly special teams players. I think Bethel and Crossan do not make the initial group, but with the two spots that open for Needham and Ramsey, I think you can get them both on the roster. Then at safety, I have 4 making the initial group: Javon Holland, Brandon Jones, Deshaun Elliott, and Elijah Campbell. The Elijah Campbell news does not sound promising, and therefore I have him projected to go on IR after the 53-man window as well, and Verone McKinley taking that spot as the 4th safety. So that's the best that I can piece together off of the information that we have right now. I will readily acknowledge this is going to change and it's going to be wrong. The Dolphins already gave me a head start and got 2 moves out of the way before I hit record on this podcast. But this is as of 8:30 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on Tuesday, August 29th. I am finishing the recording at that time. So that's the timeline for you to know whenever you consume this. This was as of 8:30 a.m. They saved me on 2 spots being wrong for Malik Reed and Dan Feeney. If you told me I got 47, 48 right, I'd be disappointed. If you told me I got 49, 50 right, I'd be excited. But here's to seeing what Chris Grier and company cook up today as we get ready for the official start of the 2023 NFL season. I'm Kyle Krabs. I hope you guys enjoyed the show. There's going to be more coming today. Look for another one this afternoon. I promise you're going to get on the show. So keep it locked in right here on Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day. You can find us on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Make it a good day. Hold on to the edge of your seat. Keep your seat belts on. It's going to be a bumpy ride, and we'll be here every step of the way. Fins up.